The man who stopped working. You know that specific moment where you're sitting at your desk, staring at something you've stared at 100 times before, and you feel nothing. Not tired, not sad, not angry, just absent. Like the part of you that used to generate a response to all of this has quietly walked out. And you're sitting there holding the shell of a routine that no longer has anyone inside it. That moment is why you're here. Carl Jung, one of the most respected psychiatrists in Europe, Freud's chosen intellectual heir, a man with a full practice and a reputation built over decades, stops being able to work. Not gradually, not because of illness or crisis. He just stops. He retreats to his house by Lake Zurich, walks to the shoreline every afternoon, and builds things with stones and mud. Small towers, little villages, structures with no logical purpose, like a child. His colleagues write concerned letters. His career, by every external measure, appears to be quietly falling apart. But Jung writes something entirely different in his journal. He says he is following something, not losing something. He calls it his confrontation with the unconscious. And he stays there in that uncomfortable, unproductive, completely inexplicable space for years. That story is your story. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand something about your situation that most psychology content will never tell you. Not because it's hidden, but because it completely inverts everything you've been taught about what's wrong with you. We're also going to get into why your body is not malfunctioning, why the voice telling you to push through is the least trustworthy voice in the room, and why what looks like losing your motivation might be the first time you've ever genuinely had it. For most of your life, you've been navigating with a compass calibrated by everyone except you. Your family's architecture of a good life, your culture's definition of success, the unspoken agreement that security is worth whatever you agree to trade for it. And because everyone around you was using the same compass, pointing the same direction, it felt like true north. It felt like reality itself. Then something recalibrated yours. Not with any announcement, not with a clean before and after, more like a slow internal pressure that crossed a threshold one day and never went back. And suddenly the needle is pointing somewhere entirely different, somewhere inconvenient, unmapped, impossible to explain to someone whose compass hasn't moved. A recalibrated compass doesn't feel like clarity at first. It feels like losing the thread. The fluorescent light of the office feels colder than it used to. The sound of a meeting you're physically present in reaches you from what feels like a very long distance. The small internal rewards that used to make the day feel acceptable, the ticked box, the completed task, the moment of being useful, have stopped registering as real. And in the absence of those familiar signals, the whole experience reads from the outside and often from the inside like something has broken down. Nothing has broken down. Your compass is working for the first time with genuine accuracy, and it is pulling persistently in a direction your current life was never designed to accommodate. Right about here, a voice arrives. You know exactly which one. It sounds measured, reasonable, and responsible. It says, other people have harder lives than you and still show up. Other people don't have the luxury of falling apart over meaning. This is just self-indulgence with a spiritual label on it. That voice deserves a direct answer, and you'll have one by the time we reach the middle of this video. For now, just notice that the voice never asks whether the life you're performing is true. It only ever asks whether you can afford to stop performing it. That is not wisdom. That is the old compass running its final, most sophisticated argument. Jung understood something that the entire architecture of modern productivity has spent a century arguing us out of. The body is not a system running parallel to the psyche. It is the psyche's most honest spokesperson. And when the conscious mind keeps overriding what the unconscious is trying to communicate, the body begins saying it instead in a language that gets harder to ignore the longer you refuse to hear it. The exhaustion that 12 hours of sleep doesn't touch. The specific physical weight that settles in your chest on Sunday evening, not because Monday is hard, but because Monday requires you to perform a version of yourself that has been vacating the premises for months. The way certain tasks now produce a response in your body before your brain has even finished reading the email, a dull, instinctive closing down that no motivational framework can fully override. These are not signs of reduced capacity. This is the body's compensatory function doing exactly what Jung described. making the cost of self-betrayal high enough that you eventually cannot keep affording it. Every day you perform a version of yourself with no genuine connection to who you actually are. You spend what Jungian psychology calls psychic energy, not as metaphor, but as something with a real budget, real consequences, and a bill that arrives with compounding interest the longer the performance continues. The exhaustion is not the problem. The performance was the problem. The exhaustion is simply the moment your system stops allowing you to pretend otherwise. And it will keep escalating until something changes, because that is precisely what it was designed to do. Here is the reframe the voice in your head most needs and most doesn't want to hear. You have been told in 1,000 quiet and not so quiet ways that motivation looks like forward momentum, output, engagement, the ability to show up, produce, and call it a functional day. So when that capacity disappears, it reads to you and to the people watching you as its absence, as something diminished that needs to be recovered and restored. But what if the entire premise is wrong? What if what you're experiencing right now is your first genuinely accurate signal of what you actually want, pointing with a precision your old performance-driven drive never once allowed? The compass isn't frozen. It's moving constantly, pulling toward meaning, toward depth, toward work that carries your actual name on it instead of a role description written by someone who has never encountered the real you. You are not unmotivated. You are motivated by something your current life has no infrastructure to support. The exhaustion lives precisely in the gap between where the compass is pointing and where you're still standing. Not in weakness, but in sheer distance. And the voice that says, other people manage just fine. Other people are navigating with the original compass. Theirs hasn't moved. That is neither their failure nor your instruction manual. After the compass recalibrates, something else happens that almost nothing prepares you for, and it tends to arrive quietly, then all at once. The performance stops requiring you to work hard and starts requiring you to look away, actively, repeatedly, at things you can no longer successfully not see. The specific dynamic in your team where everyone is performing being fine, and you are the only one in the room who can feel the temperature of the pretending. The way the culture you operate inside rewards the careful management of your own authenticity and calls that professionalism. The product, the mission, the meetings, all of it suddenly carrying a shadow you can now see with uncomfortable clarity. Like finally noticing the specific smell of a room you've been inside for years. Jung called this the reckoning with the shadow. Not only your personal shadow, but the shadow of every system you participate in. And the particular cruelty of this stage is that you cannot argue yourself back out of the seeing. Rationalization was a skill that depended on a certain level of internal distance from your own truth. And that distance has collapsed. The questions your conscience is now asking do not have satisfying professional answers. And the salary, the status, the comfort of known structures, they stop functioning as responses to those questions. Meaning was once a welcome bonus. Now it is the only currency your system will accept in exchange for your energy, and it has stopped negotiating. Jung had a precise name for what most people eventually negotiate themselves back into after an experience like this. He called it the provisional life. A life lived in permanent preparation for the real one. Always one more year, one more reason, one more condition to satisfy before the actual beginning. He saw it as one of the most widespread and quietly devastating patterns in human psychology. People who spend the entirety of their lives living almost, tolerating instead of inhabiting, standing in the waiting room of their own existence indefinitely. After awakening, the provisional life stops being uncomfortable and becomes something closer to physically unlivable. The tolerance for deferring yourself, for trading aliveness for the familiarity of a known structure, for choosing the waiting room because at least it's warm, contracts to almost nothing. The willingness to have nothing rather than keep performing something false reads from the outside as recklessness. From the inside, it is the psyche's most sophisticated act of self-preservation. You are not being irresponsible. You are refusing to keep living in rehearsal for a life that was always supposed to have already started. Jung didn't know while he sat by the lake, building those stone towers on the lake shore, that he was at the beginning of the most significant work of his life. He had no map for where he was, no language yet for what the experience meant, no timeline for when the in-between would resolve into something he could carry back into the world. He just knew, with the particular certainty that arrives not from confidence but from the complete absence of a viable alternative, that he could not return to the life the recalibration had made uninhabitable. He called this threshold the liminal space, the place between a self that no longer fits and a self that hasn't fully arrived. Spiritual awakening deposits you there without asking. And everything you're feeling, the refusal, the exhaustion, the inability to perform the old life convincingly, the search for meaning that has stopped being optional, is not the chaos of something falling apart. It is the specific, necessary pressure of something being built in the only conditions under which it can actually be built. The compass is working underneath everything. Underneath the voice, the exhaustion, the impossible gap between where you are and where the needle is pointing. It has been working this entire time. You already know you cannot build what it's pointing toward while you're still standing inside someone else's blueprint. The only question that remains is how much longer you're going to wait for permission that was never coming. The people who came out the other side of this, who built something real, something that actually carried their name, none of them figured it out by pushing harder through the old life. They figured it out by finally taking the compass seriously, even when everything and everyone around them was calling it a malfunction. You are not behind, and you are not too late. You are in exactly the stage that precedes the most important chapter of your life, which is deeply inconvenient and also completely true. And now take a moment to reflect. What is the one thing your current work asks you to pretend about yourself, about what matters, about what's real? Drop it in the comments below. You don't have to explain it, just name it. And if this video reached something in you, that's exactly what this channel exists to do. Subscribe to Fractal Wisdom, because each video goes deeper into the psychology of awakening, transformation, and what it actually looks like to build a life from the inside out.